Well, thank you very much, Heath, and great to be with you all. I will confess it is a bit intimidating to have to follow the courage of Cassidy and Sarah and Alyssa, as well as the irreverent brilliance of Charlie Sykes, with a panel on moral philosophy. But here we are, and if nothing else, the last few years have proven the incredible importance of this topic. It shows the reason why this topic, moral formation and moral leadership, preoccupied so many of the best minds throughout history, the historians, the moral philosophers, whether it was Plutarch or Thucydides or Herodotus or Aristotle. It shows why this preoccupied the minds of the founders and framers, why they wrestled so extensively in the Federalist Papers with what it meant to check and constrain and channel self-interest, to check faction, and to cultivate the better angels of one's nature. It's why George Washington took the opportunity of his farewell address to talk about the indispensable supports to political prosperity and to freedom itself that moral leadership and moral character in citizens played. And it's also why we are at such an important and in many ways unsettling crossroads right now. Because while it's certainly true that throughout history, it's not like we've had one great moral leader after the other, there have been plenty of villains and scoundrels and liars and tyrants and moral mediocrities who are citizens and who have been moral leaders. But we have retained a sense that a more perfect union is possible, and we as a country have also faced, challenged, and overcome some very significant both moral failings and moral challenges in our past. Right now, we are at a point, though, of great challenge and peril. On both ideological and partisan poles, there are real challenges to the idea of moral formation and moral leadership, whether it's on the left, where character and morality itself is seen largely as a smokescreen for power plays, and virtue and blame are seen more likely to be whether you belong to a colonizer class or based on the intersection of your identities, as well as on the hard right, where a frankly evil and nihilistic leader whose worst tendencies of cruelty and belligerence and dishonesty have been not only tolerated, but valorized as what it means to win and to show strength. So what does moral formation and moral leadership mean? What does it look like? How can we cultivate it? And what difference does it make? It'll be hard to get through all of this, but we certainly have a panel here, I think, who can make a huge dent in kind of our understanding of why this is so important, the attention we should be paying to it, and how we can cultivate it for a more perfect union. So just in starting off, I want to turn to my fellow panelists, and Michael, perhaps we'll start with you to say, when we speak about moral formation and moral character in our leaders and in our citizens, what are we talking about? How is character formed?
Great. I'm really happy to be here, really happy to be on this panel. I think part of the problem here right at the outset is that in politics, morality, the sum of what it means to be moral, has been taken up with having the right positions or the right answers. And I think that the way in which that conception of morality alone, the way that that can be misused, has become really apparent. So when we talk about formation, and I talk about spiritual formation, in part because of that reason, the spirit just refers to our character or our will. Formation is about the process by which our will takes on a specific defined character. And everyone has a formation. There's no getting around it. One of the reasons I love the name of this gathering, why I love Principles First, is because it could just be the organization for the right principles. Principles First implies that we want to be the kind of people who can uphold our principles even when it's difficult. Cassidy is a wonderful example, right? She didn't just have the right ideas. a lot of people had those ideas. A lot of people, if you ask them in a survey, would say, yeah, rule of law, fantastic. The real test is, are we the kind of people who can follow through on our intentions in the moment of crisis? And that's a real issue for us. T.S. Eliot once suggested, and by the way, he wasn't positive about this. It was an observation. T.S. Eliot said that the great human endeavor has been to try to create a system so perfect that people no longer have to be good. And that is the political conceit that we have, that we can just have the right answers without being the kind of people who can back them up. And that's why moral formation, spiritual formation is so critical.
I want to invite my fellow panelists just to jump in too as you see fit. So if there's other thoughts, feel free.
Before I begin, I just want to thank all of you for being here, and all of the people that I was able to greet and talk with last night and during the day so far here. It is so gratifying to see you in the flesh. You are, I'm old enough to remember George H.W. Bush's expression about the great civil society that was out there. He called it 1,000 points of light. And that's what I see in this group, and it is unbelievably moving, and so thank you for being here.
You can plug yourself.
So I love what you said, Michael. I was thinking about, before this panel, and I was thinking about moral formation, and that, it's very important. Morality is key to a thriving democratic republic, and we have all kinds of expressions of this from the founders where, for example, John Adams said, our Constitution was made for a religious and moral people. It is wholly inadequate to the governance of any other. And yet, look, we have to be realistic. The people on the MAGA side and the people on the far left, they also feel that they are the moral ones. They think we are evil, and they will say that very, very clearly. So Kristi Noem at CPAC said, there are two kinds of Americans. There are two kinds of people in this country, she said right now. There are people who love America, and there are people who hate America. And I'd like to, right about that. Yeah. So I want to reflect on this for a minute, because it's important to understand, I think, or at least try to understand the moral reasoning that can lead people to embrace what we think is one of the most wicked, evil forces that has darkened America's doorstep in our lifetimes. And so we have to think about the fact that they argue that the house is on fire. The country is in a dire emergency. And because of that, we have to turn to a strong man like Trump. And they say, after all, if your house were on fire and your neighbor came along with a garden hose, you wouldn't turn his help away because he was a sex offender, right? You would accept the garden hose, you would accept the help, and then you'd thank him very kindly. Now, of course, in that analogy, you would thank him, but then you wouldn't elect him president of the neighborhood association. And, that is, I think, so key to why the MAGA people always need to say, this is an emergency. The country is burning. Biden is destroying America. It is, all hands on deck, because they know that they have embraced this really morally compromised, horrible leader. And so there is never a time when they can acknowledge that this is that the country is actually just fine, that we are not in any kind of dire emergency. And so that's the secret of their, I don't know if it's the secret, it's my interpretation of their justification. Robert Heinlein, a great science fiction writer, once said, "Man is not a rational, but a rationalizing creature." And they do rationalize their support for Trump. And so they need to make the other side seem evil. That is why we have all of this nonsense about the Biden crime family. You know, Biden is many things. A master criminal, he is not. But that's the key to their moral universe. And whether we can puncture that, whether we can appeal, as Cherie says, to the better angels of their nature, I don't know, certainly not for the MAGA hardcore, but potentially for people who are not quite at that level, but who are in the more persuadable category.
Mona, I grok what you're saying on the Robert Heinlein, so thank you. I'd also like to echo what Mona said at the outset. It's a real honor to be on this panel, and I should tell everybody here, I signed up for this conference about 7 or 8 days ago, and then the next day I got an email saying, "Would you like to be on a panel?" So what I'm saying is, if you come here again next year, who knows? This could also happen to you. So whether that's good or bad is up for you to decide. I would slightly disagree with something that Mona said that. While it's true that MAGA is saying that the country's on fire, and you said but ultimately they're overstating the case that the country's fine. I would say though that the country isn't fine, and MAGA and Donald Trump are reflections of the fact how far the country has gone off course. Right, and the thing is though, but it's not just that. I mean, as we were saying before, this view that we pat ourselves on the back and say that we're the somewhat sane middle. There are those on the left and those on the right that call us evil. Because either we're not woke enough, or we're not MAGA enough, for them, and we're squishes that can't rise to the moment that is required. But I just thought though that just in the context of where we've gotten to, in where sort of this moment of amorality, for want of a better phrase, I sort of see it in a kind of a spectrum of a 25-year, a quarter-century kind of decline. And just so we can get a little bit of old school red meat in here, I would bring up a name that hasn't really been mentioned much so far, and that's Bill Clinton. I think, when you go back from that moment of, it depends on what sex is. It was at that moment where, you've got a president of the United States that is, in a sense, putting moral relativism, into the public sphere, and while there was bipartisan consensus at the time that the president had done something wrong. The question was, what was the solution about that? And Republicans thought it was impeachment, and Democrats, said, censure and move on, and so on and so forth. But what ultimately came out of that is, though, the Democrats kind of, in almost any other moment, I think, in our history, there would have, the bipartisan consensus, the pressure would have been strong enough to get the President of the United States to resign. But what we ended up with was a decision by the Democrats and allies and media and so forth, that what he had done was not so bad that it required resignation, and instead there was a powering through And the first principle, if you will, at that point was kind of power. How can we push through against these usual ethical and moral barriers that historically would have been enough to move the president out of the way and allow the vice president to take over. Instead, the president pushed through. He survived. Excuse me. But then the question is, at what cost, and what lesson was ultimately learned? And I think one of the residual lessons is that forget about ethics, forget about actual morality. The number one principle in politics is power, and I think that's a lesson that the MAGA people have learned, and their standard bearer has taken the Clinton model and amped it up to 10.
So just riffing off of that a little bit, I want to ask you each your thoughts on kind of what has gone awry. And part of what I mean about this is not just a political analysis, but we'll hearken way back, thousands of years, to St. Augustine, who talked about how virtue is largely properly ordering your loves or desires, ordering your values in a way that accords with reality, that is both wise and prudent, as well as loving things in the right way. And when you think about that, you think, okay, something has gone on beyond just the political. The former president does not fill stadiums with people looking forward to, relishing seeing their enemies humiliated, just because they want to, say, win in the next election. There's something else here, it seems like, where we the people, not just our leaders, but we the people, are starting to value the wrong things, are starting to love domination and the humiliation of our enemies too much. What has gone on? And Mona, maybe we can start with you.
Nice small topic there. There are many things that are tearing us apart. We have a radical change in family structure where many people now are living alone, and a record number of people are living alone, and record numbers of people are lonely, which isn't exactly the same thing in every case. You have lots of kids growing up with very chaotic home environments where they not only see their parents split up, but then serially the parents have new relationships and the kids are shunted around to different homes with different step-siblings and all of that, and that is not good, we know, for the stability and mental health of the kids raised in those environments, and this has been going on now for several decades. We also have the rise of the internet and the information silo, which gets mentioned a lot, but it is crucial. When I was growing up, people used to say, you are what you eat. And I think now we are what news we consume. You can tell everything you need to know about a random 70-year-old single man who lives in central Pennsylvania by whether when you walk into his house, it's Fox News that's on all the time or something else. People have become so insulated and into their own bespoke realities. They create their own realities, and it is unbelievably destructive of a country that is, by its very nature, large, pluralistic. We have lots of different communities, huge geographic diversity, religious, racial, every kind of diversity. And we need to be able to have certain things that we agree on. We need to have certain facts that we all accept as true so that we can compromise with one another and that we can say, okay, you like more immigration, we like less immigration, let's meet in the middle. That has become practically impossible in our age of bespoke realities where people on the right don't just think that Democrats want more immigration or have more liberal views about it. They think that Democrats have a scheme, a plot, run by Jews to import more dark-skinned people into the country in the Great Replacement. And so how do you compromise with such a terrible... And so those are, it's both a technological challenge that was brought to us by the internet and also by cable television, but also, and by the internet. So the technological challenge is part of our problem, and the social challenge, as I mentioned, with more and more people living alone. When you live, I'll just say this last thing about being lonely and being alone. I think I can't prove this, but I think people are more easily led into extremism when they aren't living face to face with other humans and having the ability to bounce off ideas toward, get a reality check, right? It's like, Sam saw something on the internet that says, that there's a scheme to run an underground railroad from Mexico through Canada, and it's going, right? Which, by the way, was on the internet. And when he goes online and puts this in, he gets all kinds of people who say, yes, we heard that too, you're right, we agree, it's a scheme. Whereas if he said to his wife or his live-in lover or whoever, did you hear about this thing? She'd say, what are you talking about? Right? No, that doesn't sound right. Mm-hmm. But there are fewer and fewer of those in real life sort of reality checks for a lot of Americans. And I think that's part of why we're seeing that the crazy gets more traction.
Yeah, the difficult truth is that the state of our politics is a reflection of the state of our souls. And this is the beauty and the weakness of democracy. There is no getting around the kind of people we are. And if our ultimate principles derive from politics, then our ultimate principles will be subject to political circumstances. And that is a lot of what we've seen. In 2020, a group of social scientists came out with a framework for thinking about the particular kind of polarization we have today. And they called it political sectarianism. And they said political sectarianism is a toxic cocktail of three ingredients. First, aversion, the tendency to dislike and distrust one's political opponents. Othering, the tendency to place as other or essentially different those who are political partisans, and then the tendency of a misplaced moralization, the elevation of political disagreement to that of iniquity or good and evil. And when that is the fuel of our politics, then all kinds of rationalizations can take place, similar to what Robert was talking about. The problem is not that we take politics too seriously, but that we take it seriously in all of the wrong ways. If you think politics is just about power, then that is what is going to guide your political actions. And so part of what we need to do is provide a vision for a politics that is not solely about who has the power, who can impose their will. And that's a chief challenge because, frankly, to Mona's point, that's how our politics has operated for quite some time. We need to have a different source. I mean, this is the issue with liberalism unmoored from a higher philosophy, which is that liberalism allows for decisions that are made on the basis of power and the popular will. But if that is your only construction of reality, then yeah, everything just becomes, well, you have one opinion about January 6th, I have another. But the thing is, there's been like a lot of, there is a truth, like there is a reality. Like it's not just who thinks January 6th was a bunch of patriots fighting for a fair election and who thinks it was a disgraceful affront to democracy. Like there's an actual reality there, and we don't need to be insecure just because there's a difference of opinion. We actually need to understand that we can name a truth even if it's contested.
Exactly, and some of us will looking partly in this in the political context, but we can also see this sort of collapse or this moral relativistic aspect in other institutions as well. And certainly, one that I've been part of for 25 years, the media, broadly understood, bears a large responsibility for this as well. Now, as Mona said, part of it is there's been a sort of kind of a collapse of media, partly because of the internet and the siloing of news. But one of the greatest responsibilities that media traditionally has is to inform and to educate. Now, either yesterday or the day before, I forget now exactly what day these clips ran. So, in one of his events, the former president was saying, I'm going to stand for Christians because the other side is coming to take your crosses, and the first thing that communists do is try and get rid of all these religious symbols and so forth. Basically red meat, terrifying the base. Meanwhile, you had a guest on MSNBC who basically said that if Christian nationalists believe that our rights come from God, and this is what the Christian nationalists believe, and this is what they're trying to do if they get into power. All you have to do is look at something like the Constitution, which I think you figure, it's been in the news. It's something that people should be able to read. You actually can find that it says right there that the rights come from a creator. It's not a Christian nationalist sensibility to believe that. But when a media entity puts that out there, it makes it so much easier for the other, for people on the other side to say, well, maybe Trump's got a point. Maybe Trump's got a point. Maybe they are trying to come after us, for our religion, for the things we actually, for we actually believe. So that sort of thing is happening from the media. And then, meanwhile, if you're watching the House hearings a few weeks ago, and you've got three intelligent, supposedly intelligent academics who can't find it easy for them to say that, if our student body, calls for the death of Jews, that might violate our free speech codes. I mean, when these supposedly mediating institutions also are not able to either A, educate us correctly, or B, make clear moral statements, it's not surprising that that the broader society is collapsing as well.
So, Robert, I want to pick up on one of your points just now, which is about our mediating institutions. And of course, our mediating institutions have been one of the chief ways of trying to call forth the better angels of our nature, at least in terms of being morally formative. As an aside, of course, institutions that are morally formative can also be morally deformative, which is why the formation of those institutions is also so important. And I think it's fair to say that we're at a point right now where many of our most important and formative institutions are weakened, which is true in both the political sphere. I mean, I think by any measure, Congress is significantly weaker than it was just a few years ago, but also in our civic sphere, with families and churches and schools also facing their own internal challenges. And Mona, maybe we can start with you. What hope do you see for the renewal and reinvigoration of morally formative institutions?
Well, at the risk of getting outside my area of comfort, because I'm Jewish, but I'm very interested in what goes on in the Christian world, which is far more influential, obviously, in this country. there's a great book by Tim Alberta called The Kingdom, the Power, and the Glory, where he outlines, yes, applaud that book, fantastic, the corruption of the churches and how they have become really sacrilegious. I mean, they have replaced a worship of the United States with for God. They have replaced in many cases, not all, obviously, but in many cases, they are, elevating Donald Trump to some sort of, godly figure and status. And that is profoundly, obviously, dangerous, deforming of our national character. And the struggle within the church. Now, of course, they should be morally forming institutions, but a lot of the pastors will say, look, they're watching Fox and they're on the internet, 12 hours a day, and I've got them for 2 hours on Sunday. It's no contest. And so they people come to church now believing in QAnon and that sort of thing, and they're impatient with pastors who try to dissuade them. So that is a huge, huge problem. An institution, the churches, that should be a bulwark, if you will, against yes, against the forces of nihilism and baseless hatred and demagoguery, are instead elevating it, joining in, giving fuel to the fire. The good news is that there is pushback, and that there are people within that world who are very energetically attempting to roll it back and provide far better models. I mean, Russell Moore, David French has been involved with this, Tim Alberta himself, many others. And so we have to hope and give them all the support we can, hope that is at least somewhat successful. I mean, people are drawn to religion because it it helps you to see the good, and it helps you to see what is right. And we have to rely on that part of human nature to prevail in the end. But it is a huge, huge struggle to sort of wrap your arms around what's happening in the churches. I defer now to you, Michael.
I'll just say certainly we're seeing. I have a new book out on the spirit of our politics, and I talk about this concept. Some of you may be familiar with the term moral therapeutic deism. I introduce in the book the idea of political therapeutic deism, which is supported by beliefs such as a God is on my political party's side, or God has a general approval of my behavior in politics because I hold the right positions. And there has been a development for a number of reasons we won't be able to discuss today, where what it means, in the same way that what it means to be to have a Christian politics means to have the right answers on a few discrete policy issues. There's been a theological development that is almost exclusively in the West, that what it means to be a Christian is to provide mental assent to a few lines of doctrine, and you could be the worst, you could have the worst kind of character possible, yet so long as you're willing to nod your head yes when you're supposed to nod your head yes, then that's it. You're in, you're part of the right club. And that is fundamentally contrary to the gospel. That's fundamentally, I am, to the Christian nationalism point, I am profoundly hesitant, both substantively but also strategically, to point at a group of folks who welcome someone like Donald Trump, to tell them that loving your enemies, that stuff from Jesus, maybe try that in your personal life, but look, if you try that in politics, you're gonna get steamrolled, so let me take care of you. I'm really hesitant to say that's Christian anything. We really need to we need to be careful about what we're willing to give over to Donald Trump and his branding and his outreach. No, I feel very confident fundamentally saying that if your politics is not oriented toward the good of your neighbors, it is not Christian. It is not Christian.
I mean, who needs a golden calf when we have golden sneakers? You know. I mean, we're running out of time, but really, this particular part of the question is much broader. Because we also have a large, arguably an increasing percentage of society that no longer sees itself as religious. Is not just no longer Christian. They're completely secular, if not atheist, maybe agnostic. And when you have that society that sort of decides to stray away from some version of religion, the lessons that religion can still inform on a broader secular society tends to deteriorate, and the common moral language that kept the country going for 250 years or so starts to fray, and we no longer manage to in a sense speak the same language, and that's sort of where we are. So what's going on with MAGA and Christianity and so forth is certainly a problem, but the fact that we can't really speak the same language across the society, I think, is the far greater problem.
Could I jump in on that point? Because for years I used to say, yeah, it's really a problem that religion is declining and that more and more people are not members of congregations, and they don't have that sort of community development in their lives, and that's a problem. And yet, right now, we are also living in a time where some of the craziest and most destructive voices in this country are the most religious, I'm sorry to say.
So we've talked about the kind of moral confusion that seems to, and different realities that people are occupying, such that we actually are in a situation where you can have protesters chanting in support of genocide on one hand, and on the other hand, people invading the Capitol and hosting a prayer service. We've talked about the decline of some of the morally formative institutions that have helped shape character. We've talked about the perversions and distortions of Christianity that have enabled and accelerated the decline of character and moral leadership. So, of course, all this leads us to the big question: what do we do? How do we go about renewing and reinvigorating moral formation and moral leadership in our country? And we're going to mix up the order here. And Robert, we're going to start with you.
Oh, thanks a lot. The immediate word that comes to mind is pray. I'm gonna say a phrase that you don't often hear on panels like this, and that is I don't know. Because, as we said, what's going on here is something really fundamental, and certainly MAGA and Trump are symptomatic of what's going on. But it can be somewhat argued that aspects on the far left, some of the wokeism sometimes elevates itself to almost to a pseudo religion as well, and that is also something that is to be kind of pushed back on, the sort of amor propre, the kind of self-love and identity overall. I mean, I think this sounds like a little bit of a cliche, but some of a lot of it has to start in terms of basic education. I mean, you're trying to instill civics and a moral civics and so forth, at the earliest ages. But that means, in a sense, once again, sort of having stronger control at the elementary schools and so forth. So that's one place to start.
Well, I admire you for saying you don't know. You're right. Most people don't say that. And I would agree. I'm not sure. I will say what I personally am trying to do in this moment, because I do think that the information silos, the two completely different realities that people live in, is one of our biggest challenges. And so one of the reasons I started the podcast Beg to Differ is that I wanted to show or model that you can have a civilized conversation among people who have different points of view. These days we do happen to agree because we all agree about Trump. But on other things we do disagree, and we model that you can respectfully hear out somebody who has a different point of view and come to some sort. You may not agree, but at least you can have an airing of views, and you can have an agreed set of facts. And I have to believe that the greatest challenge is helping this country to be able to have at least a shared reality instead of separate realities. And I would just close by reminding us that we have an unbelievably rich history and tradition to draw from, and that gives us strength. Our roots are so deep. And I was reading about John Adams spending his first couple of nights in the White House. He was the first president to live in the White House. And at the time, it was unfinished, it was drafty, it was damp, uncomfortable. But he sat down and wrote a letter to Abigail, and he closed with these words, which have since been inscribed into the mantelpiece in the fireplace in the state dining room. That was done. But here's what he wrote. "Before I end my letter, I pray heaven to bestow the best of blessings on this house and all that shall hereafter inhabit it. May none but honest and wise men ever rule under this roof."
Michael, bring us home.
Yeah, well, thank you. Fortunately, I do have the answers. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah.
What's the name of your book?
Yes, it's all there, and I gave you just enough of a taste to want to find the actual answers in the book. That's $15.99 on Amazon. Look, I mean, right, part of what it means to come to terms with our situation is that there is no program or three-point plan for getting us on the right track. And I think we could delude ourselves into thinking that there's a technocratic approach here. One thing I would say is one of the greatest gifts that we could give our politics in this moment is not telling it what it is, what it must be, but reminding our politics and reminding our fellow citizens of what politics is not. We need to provide a further horizon than just political outcomes. And that means further out than this upcoming general election, further out than Donald Trump. We need to help folks understand what is true, that politics is not ultimate, it's penultimate. Politics is not the area of the dogmatic, it's the area of the prudential. Politics is the area of the contingent and the mediated. That politics is not a pure expression of our will, it's about a contestation of ideas. Our political parties are not meant to be brands, they're actually vehicles for mediating difference. These kinds of things, helping Americans once again, or maybe for the first time, rightly situate politics, would do so much to help the state of our politics.
Michael, Mona, and Robert, thank you so much. It's been a real delight.
Thank you, Cherie. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.